CatSync TV.
Hey everybody, CatSync TV. Today it's your guest interviewer JB here, and we are talking with author, poet, screenwriter, composer, and all-around polymath John Shirley. John, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. Appreciate it.
I'm glad to be here.
So wonderful. I'd like to talk a little bit about John, if we could. You've been writing, you've been published at least since the late 70s. Can you tell us, early on, were there any specific instances, any specific authors that kind of inspired you early on? I mean, I know you've done things with the Lovecraft kind of references throughout the things. Was there a particular author or authors that kind of inspired you early on?
I was widely read in genre fiction, and yeah, a lot of different authors inspired me, so from different fields. Mm-hmm. Harlan Ellison comes to mind. Right. He was a great inspiration to me. Ursula Le Guin. I went to a writer's workshop where Frank Herbert was there, for example, who created Dune. He was the author of Dune and many other things. And Ursula Le Guin was there for a week. Harlan Ellison, Robert Silverberg. When you've got people like that and you can actually ask them questions, they're going to be a big influence on you. I mean, they were there in the room with us, with the other writers, when I was a young man. There were also people like various poets like Edna St. Vincent Millay, modern poets of different kinds, Wallace Stevens. So I had a pretty broad palette to draw on.
Wonderful. One of the things you just mentioned, Harlan Ellison, I had watched not too long ago a documentary on Harlan Ellison where he was talking about, and talking about as his nature a little bit. He was talking about, for writing itself, there's art to it, but there's also a certain amount of just getting in there and doing the work. I mean, do you find like when you're writing, is it a matter of inspiration or it's a matter of, look, I've got these goals to accomplish and I just go in there with a framework and I just get it done? I mean, how do you go about writing?
Well, writing is a mix of inspiration and drudgery. And there's a lot of hard work involved, especially in revising and rethinking. One has to do it at least 3 revisions, or I do. Joe Haldeman said he only did 1 draft. He told me this, but he said he did the other revisions, but always in his mind. He just did it over and over again, each sentence, until it seemed as perfect and simple and direct and effective as possible in his mind, and then he just wrote it down. But most of us have to write something out and then struggle with the text. However, inspiration is this. It's a blessed thing that writers are devoutly devoted to when they can be in touch with it, and sometimes there's a real flow that passes through you, and even that is probably going to have to be edited, but sometimes you really feel that there's something resonating there that you don't want to mess with too much. You want to just let it flow.
Sure. Okay. Wonderful. One of the other things I wanted to talk about is you've done a number of you've done a couple screenplays for films. You've also done a lot of television writing for animation and for science fiction and so forth. I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I mean, before we go into that, I want to talk about when you are writing, like for one of these shows or one of these things, and you're dealing with these established characters and sort of a framework that's already there. I mean, how much of that, is that different from, let's say, when you're writing one of your own short stories or one of your own novels, you can just, I'm presuming, just let the imagination take you where you want. But, when you're writing something that has, quote unquote canon to it, when you're writing for one of the Star Trek shows as you've done, or I saw, it was funny. I talked to Jerry King about this. It came up the other day. I was just, I watch a lot of animation and I was just watching on YouTube or something, the RoboCop cartoons. And I said, I asked Sherry, I said, is that the same guy that you collaborate with? And he said, yeah, that's him. He said, so when you're writing for one of those kind of properties or something like that, what are the challenges of something like that? I mean, presumably for a show, you have a show Bible or whatever you would call it. You can and can't do these things. I mean, could you talk a little bit about that?
You answered most of my questions for me, but yes, there really is a difference of process between writing one's own work straight out, like as in a novel or short story. There's a canon that you work with, and I worked on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. You have to adapt. Some people are better at it than others. I mean, it's almost a matter of personality. My personality is self-contained, and I don't really work very naturally with a team of other writers, but I forced myself to because it paid well, but also because I really liked, for example, Star Trek, and I wanted to have something I visualized in my mind appear on a screen somewhere, because I love movies and television. So I was motivated, but it was kind of tough sometimes because I'm pretty individualistic about writing, and I have a lot of my own ideas, and basically it's a lot of their job to say no when you say, how about if we do this? No, that character doesn't ever do that, or that is not within our, like the atmosphere we have on this show. So you have to just keep going through the obstacle course all the time, and adapting and trying to get something of your own into it. And it's a challenge, but it's worth it when it happens. I worked on The Crow, of course. I did the treatment and the first 4 drafts. But even that, when it wasn't canonized, it was adapted from a comic book, which had to be reasonably faithful to James O'Barr's creation, and I had to work with producers and studio people. Edward R. Pressman, who just died recently, by the way, famous producer, and that is its own acclamation, its own adaptation is involved. You have to be on kind of quick on your feet in the room to get your ideas past these guys, and to evade some of their ideas. They want to put their own imprint on it, and you don't want to lose the vision. So it comes more. I've written a lot of novels, and one of the reasons is that I do have a lot more control of them. But even then, editors have their input too, and their suggestions.
I want to talk also a little bit about, I did mention Jerry King earlier, a friend who is just, sings your praises every opportunity he has. You've been working in music, at least from what I understand, since the 80s. You had an album on celluloid way back when?
Yeah, I was on celluloid, and I was I started out in punk rock bands
Sure.
in Portland, Oregon, and I played with Sado Nation and some other bands. I was the lead singer, and I did fine. But then I decided to move to New York City, and I started a band there called Obsession, and we signed with Celluloid. And it was a mixed bag. I mean, we played at some major clubs in town, and I did some minor touring in Europe. And I supported the band by writing fiction. It was my day job was to write fiction. My main interest was writing songs and being a performer, and I still do it on and off. But fiction has taken over my life, and as an artist, really. But it was intense and scary sometimes, and a very powerful thing. Just a few years ago, I opened for the Blue Oyster Cult at the Roseland Theater in Portland. There was a couple thousand people there, and it was a big show and we kicked ass. It was my band, the Screaming Geezers.
Right.
With Jerry King, I have done long range sort of remote collaboration, and most of the time he gives me some music and then I think up words for it, and so he's laying down the inspiration and the whole feel of the thing, and then I respond to that. So and then I record at a studio near here over what he's done, and we do various edits on that and rearrangements, and eventually we came up with Spaceship Landing in a Cemetery, and short stories for Tall Aliens, and Escape from Gravity, 3 albums.
Yeah, and they're all fantastic. I actually have all 3 of them. I really dig them. Before we go on and talk about the Blue Oyster Cult a little bit, I want to go back to the celluloid for a sec. Just kind of because I have a friend who's doing a kind of long-term project on this. Did you have any interactions with Giorgio Gomelski? I know he was kind of tangentially involved, like with Bill Laswell and Celluloid at that time.
Yeah, I remember Giorgio a bit. He was in a room where we talked with people who owned Celluloid, and I don't remember a whole lot of it. It was just a lot of suggestions were made about the personnel in the band and that kind of thing. Our direction was what we called futuristic funk in that band. It was kind of a progressive rock funk blend or something, and almost space rock sometimes. It was like not that mainstream in some ways, and we had people like Bill Laswell giving ideas, but ultimately it was the band that decided what to do and went with it.
Okay, fantastic. So we did talk, or you did mention rather, Blue Oyster Cult. So how did that association begin? How did that come about? Because you've done.
Well, I was a big fan of the Blue Oyster Cult. So I just happened to get to know people through the magazine Mondo 2000. I was interviewed for that magazine, and a lady there was friends with the people in the Blue Oyster Cult. She said, they're looking for lyrics now, and I see that you write lyrics for your own bands, and you mentioned that you're a fan of theirs. And so it happened that way. She set it up. I sent them through her a big stack of lyrics, and I didn't hear anything for several years, and I thought they'd said no, and then all of a sudden I got a record in the mail. and it had 8 of my songs on it, my lyrics.
Oh, no shit.
So it was basically a publishing deal with them, and they send me money from time to time for that. And I did 2 of those albums, and then their most recent thing is a studio album called The Symbol Remains, which is actually pretty successful right now. It came out about 1.5 to 2 years ago. And I wrote 5 of the songs, including the 2 singles. And if you go to YouTube, you can find The Symbol Remains, and they're getting a lot of attention there. But also the album has sold pretty well, so they did a big comeback. So I'm part of that too, and that's a thrill for me because I have a deep respect for their intelligence and their musical, their incredible musical skills.
Sure. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about, you've got 1 new release, 2 new releases, is that correct? You sent us some of the cover of one of them. Actually, I'm looking online. One of them was really, really, really weird stories, but that looks like it's actually a little bit older, isn't it?
Well, the book is really, 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 really weird stories. We don't want to leave out a really.
Okay.
It is a reissue, yes, from an earlier edition, but this one has 5 new stories in it, and it's been re-edited by me. There's a new introduction, and it's a unique book. This is why I'm kind of emphasizing it's because no one else has tried to do a collection of stories like this. These are all my stories, and it's in 4 distinct sections, and each section is guaranteed to be weirder than the last. The stories are weirder. Finally, it gets to a kind of peak of ultimate weirdness in this section 4 with 4 reallys. and it's a very intense experience for readers if they stick with it.
Sure, sure.
And then the other book is Stormland, which is basically a kind of a merging of cyberpunk and climate fiction, you would say, and also the futuristic detective story. It's about an area of the United States in the future that is having permanent storms. Every day there is a storm. There are hurricanes like every third day. And so nobody lives there, or do they? And if they do live there, why? And what are they up to? And we find out there are some people managing to live in this flooded and hurricane hammered town, Charleston, actually. And there is a series of very strange murders going on, and somebody has to find out why that is and what's going on and how it relates to this place. But it's also kind of a metaphor for extreme weather in the United States and conditions that people will face increasingly as we get deeper into the effects of climate change.
So when you're getting inspiration for, or let's say you're doing research for a book like that, I mean, how much, do you go down the hard science fiction kind of quote unquote, route? You kind of look at the data and kind of go through the scientific stuff and kind of extrapolate from that? Or does it just come from maybe, a little bit of an imagination? I mean, you talked about, again, this is things that Frank Herbert talked about, when he was writing the Dune books and so forth. He, the science kind of sparked him to go in a certain direction and thinking about, scarcity of things and so forth. I mean, how much, when you are writing a book such as that, what is the process? You get the inspiration, and then where do you go from there? Can we talk about that a little bit, please?
It's different in different projects. In this case, and in many things I write, it's about wanting to make a statement of some kind, wanting to bring attention to something. So I look for a story that is a metaphor for what I want to say. I mean, I don't want to be, preachy and really ham-handed about what I'm trying to say in the novel, but I look for a metaphor that really brings it into relief, and that is what we have when we're in Stormland, where there's a permanent storm. A permanent storm is a great metaphor for different kinds of human conditions, and also for what's coming. I started with the metaphor, and then I began to look for the scientific justification for an area of permanent storms on the Earth. And I was able to find reasonable justification for it. But there will be, in fact, even now, there are areas more prone to storms, and their annual dealings with hurricanes is becoming more than annual. It's becoming much more often. Several times a year, and that pattern is becoming more assertive in our climate. So it's all coming true, and I was able to do some meteorological reading, and also I had to study like what were the effects on people when there were terrible storms, and I had to read about that. And so I did a great deal of research, but it all starts with the metaphor.
I did want to talk about, this may or may not be true. Again, I was looking at I got some notes here I took off.
I deny everything.
I took them off your Wikipedia page, which, sometimes cannot be the most reliable source for things. But you did have a nonfiction book about Gurdjieff. I'm always not sure how to pronounce that.
No one's sure.
No one's sure. Sure. Okay. Can you talk a little bit about that? This is at request of a friend who teaches philosophy, was kind of fascinated by that. So what is it that you found fascinating about Gurdjieff, or Gurdjieff, if you like?
Gurdjieff, I say Gurdjieff. Okay. A lot of people say Gurdjieff. It's potato patata. He embodied a fusion of Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy. Western Hermeticism, Alexandrian philosophy, Neoplatonism, things like that, and the insights from the East, from India, from Tibet, places like this, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu spirituality. He was able to create a fusion of that and sort of Western attitudes. It's also the Western attitude of experimentation and scientific method. He said, only believe what you can prove for yourself. You know, he didn't ask for faith. There's a kind of faith involved, but it's just faith that will get somewhere eventually. It's not some kind of rigorous religious faith. So he had specific methods for getting to a place where we are more free inside and more autonomous, where we're capable of waking up. His basic trip, if you like, is that all human beings are asleep when they're going about their daily lives, another level of sleep. Even I mean, it's not as deep as the sleep we have at night, but it's another level of sleep. He provides specific methods for breaking out of that and for waking up. And you know, you'll find analogies to these in Zen, in Sufism, for example, other forms of esoteric teaching. But I think he really did a great job of crystallizing the methods for people. And it was an astonishing person. It was very different, kind of a crazy wisdom practitioner, as they call it. But he was not a guru. He just tried to create a school where he could help people wake up. And I have observed since I was young that I was asleep when I thought, some of the time when I thought I was awake. I would catch myself walking around and talking to people, but being in a state that wasn't really there, wasn't truly present. And I noticed it. And it bothered me, and I saw this in other people where they just seemed kind of reactive all the time and robotic. So I started looking for teachers who recognized this too, and Krishnamurti is one, for example. He was from India. Gurdjieff was very practical about it and found a practical way to deal with it and to wake people up. And that was the path that I chose, and I wrote a book about him. Yeah, Gurdjieff, an introduction to his life and ideas.
Fantastic. All right, great answer. Thank you for that. Okay, again, another thing that I kind of scraped off the Wikipedia page is it mentions the Church of the Subgenius. Is that accurate? I mean, were you involved with that? We did a thing.
Well, yeah, it's a kind of mix of art project and satire of religion. It's comedic, but the imaginary prophet at the heart of it, Bob, says that if you think it's just a joke, you'll never get the punchline.
Right. Wonderful. Well, it does kind of relate to, this sort of, in some of your writing, at least, I get an appreciation for, a sense of the absurd sometimes, or, the craziest answer can always be the sanest answer, occasionally, this kind of thing. So it seemed to kind of fit right in with what I was picking up from that. Okay, wonderful. So what are you working on next? What's coming up next for you? Do you have anything else in the works? Is there another novel coming out, another short stories, kind of book of
Well,
sorts?
I just had a novelette in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction called Sacrificial Drones. Mm-hmm. And it's a very near future, very cyberpunk inflected near future story, and I feel like it's one of my more powerful things. So that's out there. It's in the November-December issue. And I have written actually a trilogy of historical Westerns because I grew up fascinated by the Western, and this rather than Western philosophy, this is West as in west of the Mississippi,
Right.
Western stories and the true stories of the West, essentially. And the better Western writers like Larry McMurtry So I finally got my chance to write a trilogy of these, and one of the main characters is a woman scientist in the Old West, and there were women scientists in the 19th century. Science was often in the 1870s called natural philosophy, but people were following it. People were talking about Darwin, and this woman is a suffragist. She's what we call a suffragette now. She was an activist for women's votes, and she's a scientist, but kind of a self-taught one, but very knowledgeable. And so she's an anomaly out there in the Old West, obviously. And she meets a gunfighter who's a former Union major from the, he was a hero of the Civil War, and they have a romance, and a lot of vicissitudes and problems that they have to struggle with. There's a good deal of action in the novel, but really we keep coming back to this extraordinary woman, and so I wanted to find a way to show that the kind of cliche idea of women in the West was incomplete at the very least. And there were all kinds of women out there who were really doing progressive things, because it was possible in the West for them to be more independent than back East, where things were more rigid for women.
Sure. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So, kind of a closing question. So, do you read any contemporary authors out there, or anyone you see kind of been coming up for the past couple of years you want to shine some light on? Anyone that really kind of took you by surprise lately?
Well, I'm reading Anna Lee Newitz's The Terraformers right now. Anna Lee Newitz is just a really bright light in journalism about the contemporary world and progressive ideas. But The Terraformers is a science fiction novel about people trying to create ecological perfection on alien planets. And it is a sort of metaphor itself about our own difficulties with the deteriorating environment in our world now. So she's a great writer. I mean, she's excellent, and she's a gripping storyteller, and she has a sense of humor, and it all comes together in The Terraformer. So that's one I recommend.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today. Mr. John Shirley, the amazing, the author, as I said, composer, poet, man, just all around wonderful human being. Thank you so much, man.
All right, thanks for having me.
To find out more about John Shirley and his work, please visit his website and check out the description below this video. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to CatSynth TV.
You are watching CatSynth TV.